Number 5. The Diversion Project. During the time that homosexuality was considered a disease, many experiments were done to cure them, from electric shocks to unwanted sex change to shoving eggs up the rectum. But the most recent one and most famous one was the experiment done in South Africa between the year 1971 until 1989. It was done by the government during their apartheid era. During those years, there was an obvious racial segregation in South Africa, and homosexuality was actually illegal. Men and women from the army was forced into the program and had no choice because they were conscripted by the South African government. Even after homosexuality was not considered a mental illness anymore and aversion therapy was deemed useless in the US, the South African Defense Force still believed it could be cured. They used the usual electric shock treatments while showing same-sex erotic material to associate pain with homosexuality. They even tried hormone therapy, and some even got a chemical castration, all without being told on what drugs they were given. When hormone therapy was no longer reversible, most were forced to get a gender reassignment surgery, with the backwards thinking that by being the opposite sex everything would be solved. But no, being homosexual does not equal to wanting to be transsexual. Of note, 900 individuals were forced to change their sex, where some were left unfinished and some even died during surgery. But 900 were just those forced to change their sex. The total amount of people forced to become test subjects were actually unknown, but it's definitely more than just 900 individuals. Number 4. Unit 731 or Nanasan Ichi Unit. The Imperial Japanese Army established many bases in China. A particular base in Pingfan was one of the largest bases used as a covert biological and chemical warfare research center during the Second Sino-Japanese War and World War II by Unit 731. In public, their work was under the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department. It's not entirely a lie, but it's not the complete truth either. Unit 731 dealt with human experimentations that only wanted results without caring a single thing about humanity. They referred to their test subjects as logs, probably because of the constant cutting they were doing, and they experimented on anyone they could get, from prisoners of war to civilians, and any race they could get, such as Chinese, Russians, Americans, Southeast Asians, Koreans, British, even Pacific Islanders. They didn't even care about the gender and age of their subjects. It is believed that more than 10,000 people became test subjects to Unit 731, and numerous experiments were done on them by the end of the project. All the horrors you could think of for military human experimentations were actually real. People were gassed, electrocuted, frozen, burnt, dissected, vivisected, amputated, transplanted, all while still alive and all without anesthesia, because they believed that anesthesia would skew the results of their experiments, and death would mean they would not be able to get fresh samples because of decomposition. Definitely also because they thought that it would be a waste of anesthesia. People were subjected with diseases such as cholera, anthrax, and even the bubonic plague without their knowledge, while some prisoners were raped to force women to get pregnant, and others to get them infected with STDs such as syphilis, though most of them were just raped because they were prisoners. Other than clinical experimentations, some were even used as test subjects for testing weapons like grenades and flamethrowers. Sadly, most of them were subjected to more than one experimentation at a time. None of the human subjects were kept alive, as some died during the experiments while others were euthanized when deemed unusable. Ishii Shiro was the head of Unit 731. He was an army medical officer and a microbiologist. With his covert experiments, he produced numerous scientific papers of his findings without any guilt whatsoever. In his papers, he referred to his test subjects as monkeys, and the worst thing about this is that it was actually an open secret that humans were the real test subjects of his experiments. But his findings were very valuable. So, near the end of World War II, members of Unit 731 were bound to an oath of secrecy. Ishii destroyed the research facilities and all or most of the records and prisoners. that after they lost World War II, the Allied powers who knew of the experimentations also kept quiet of these experimentations for an exchange of information. Number 3. The Stanford Prison Experiment. Ever had the question as to why the prison is a rough and violent place? A psychologist by the name of Philip Zimbardo had this question. He questioned if it is because of the individual's character or if it is because of the power structure of the place. Well, the question was also asked by the U.S. Office of Naval Research as they helped fund the experiment. Thus, Zimbardo conducted an experiment done on college students where half of them role-played as guards while the other half as prisoners. In 1973, he converted the basement of the Stanford University Psychology building into something resembling a prison. To make it as real as possible, there was even a solitary confinement. He put up an ad for the experiment which pays $15 a day, and with that, around 70 students applied for it. 24 students were selected after an assessment that deemed they were normal clean-cut students, where only 21 of them proceeded with the experiment. Their roles were given randomly with a flip of a coin. 11 of them became guards, and 10 of them prisoners. He planned to leave them to their own devices for 2 weeks, but it ended in a mere 6 days because of circumstances, a change in personalities. The result of the experiment was interesting enough there's even a movie made about it, but I digress. So, the experiment started with the guards being stationed in the prison, given uniforms, special sunglasses to give no eye contact with prisoners, and a whistle around their neck. Well, the supposed prisoners went home. The 10 prisoners were then arrested for armed robbery and burglary in their own homes, brought to the nearest police station and treated like actual felons. Their mugshots taken, fingerprints taken, and then detained in the police station with a blindfold, awaiting for the transfer to the prison in the university basement. At the university prison, each prisoner was searched and stripped naked, deloused as if to tell them that they were unclean, and put on a degradation procedure similar to how other prisons operated. To reduce the sense of individuality between the prisoners, each prisoners were given ID numbers. They are called by their numbers and could only refer to themselves by their numbers. They were each given a grayish smock with no undergarments nor pants allowed, with their prison ID number printed on its front and back. They also had to wear stockings on their head at all times in place of shaving their heads, which was also for reducing their individuality and to further humiliate the prisoners. Finally, their foot was chained to remind the prisoners that they were in an oppressive environment even when they were sleeping. Within mere hours of the experiment, the guards started showing their authority in a sadistic manner, tormenting the prisoners with taunts, insults, and petty, humiliating orders. Push-ups were ordered as a means of physical punishment, and the guards would also suddenly blow the whistle at random times, even at around 2 in the morning, to wake up the prisoners for a sudden roll call. On the second day, the prisoners revolted. They ripped their numbers, removed the stocking caps, and barricaded themselves inside the cells. This made the guards angry and frustrated, blaming the night shift guards on being too lenient. Because they were given free rein of the situation, they had to handle the rebellion themselves without the help of the university. What was supposed to be a 2-week experiment only lasted 6 days. Prisoners started thinking that they were real prisoners, and in a hopeless situation, guards became more sadistic when prisoners became more submissive. There were no trust between prisoners, with everyone blaming and tattling on each other. Even the researchers were starting to think that they were actual prison superintendents, worrying about the security of the prison rather than gathering actual data. Luckily, Zimbardo came back to his senses and stopped the experiment by the 6th day when he found out through videotapes that the guards would alleviate their boredom in the middle of the night, thinking that the experiment was off, by subjecting the prisoners to pornographic and more degrading abuse. It shows less than 6 days was needed for humans to abuse the power they had and to break under oppression. 1/3 of the guards became total sadists, and none of their initial assessment and personality tests managed to link what made them succumb to power. Number 2. The Obedience Experiment. Remember the experiment I talked about in the previous video with people pushing a button to electrocute a puppy because they were asked to? Well, this is the actual experiment where they derived the puppy experiment from. It was an experiment by Stanley Milgram, conducted in the early 1960s. He was curious how far people would go in harming another person when given an order from authority. Would people be willing to kill because it was an order, or would their personal conscience stop them from killing? Thus, he recruited 40 volunteers from various walks in life, but they're all male. He told them that they will be participating in an experiment to determine the effect of punishment on learning ability, and that whenever the other volunteer gives a wrong answer, an electric shock would be given. The shocks would also be increased in intensity by 15 volts per wrong answer. There were 30 switches from 15 volts to a maximum of 450 volts, which was marked Danger, Severe Shock. Volunteers thought they had equal chance of either being a teacher or the learner, but in fact all the volunteers ended up being the teachers, while the learner was actually an actor working for the experimenters. The learner was to complain with increasing intensity. Around 270 volts, the learner would start screaming and then fall silent at around 330 volts. The teachers would treat silence as the wrong answer, thus prompting them to shock the learner further. The experiment would then be stopped after 3 shocks of 450 volts. Apparently, 65% of the volunteers continued to the maximum 450 volts, and 100% of them continued to 300 volts. Sure, most would turn to the experimenter asking about the situation, which the experimenters would reply calmly saying that they should continue. He concluded that people were more likely to continue when the authoritative figure was in the room with them and when they believed that the authority would accept full responsibility for whatever happens. Number 1. The Monster Study. The experiment was actually a stuttering experiment, but it was named as the Monster Study because the kids in the experiment retained speech problems during the course of their life, and because it reminds people of the Nazi experiments using human subjects. Anyways, it started with Wendell Johnson. In 1937, he was an assistant professor, and at the time, the lead professors in the department he was in believed that stuttering was a disorder from misdirected brain signals and was all physiology. But Johnson didn't believe it was all physiology, but rather was a learned behavior. This was because he himself was a stutterer, and through his life experience he recalled to only start stuttering when he was around 5 or 6, when a teacher said that he was a stutterer. Since then, he became more self-conscious with his voice and wording, which in turn caused him to stutter on a daily basis, and thus it actually became a habit. This idea was interesting and very different from what was said then, because if it wasn't physiology and was something learnt, this means it can be learnt. However, he needed proof. This was where the experiments came into the picture. In 1938, he got one of his clinical psychology graduate student, Mary Tudor, to make a thesis of the exact experiment. The main question needed answering was, can diagnosing normal disfluency as stuttering really cause stuttering? So 22 orphan children were chosen for the experiment, with an age range of 5 to 15 years old. 10 of them were known stutterers put in Group 1, and the rest with normal fluency in Group 2. They were later divided again in half into Groups A and B. 5 of the known stutterers in Group 1A were told that they did not stutter and that their speech was fine. Group 1B was told that yes, their speech was as bad as everyone said. Group 2A were told that they were developing a stutter and that they must be corrected immediately, while Group 2B were praised accordingly. Apparently, the experiment went exactly as he hypothesized. Group 2A showed that even on children way past the age where they usually develop a stutter, if they are told that they are saying things wrongly and got their self-esteem lowered, they would eventually stutter. After they were told they were developing a stutter, they actually refused to talk to people because they were afraid of stuttering, and behavioral changes were imminent. Even after the experiment was done and Tudor told them that they didn't have anything to worry about, only 2 of the children improved their speech fluency, and 2 more actually got worse. The experiment really did change their lives. Also, I'd like to thank Dirk Crash for being the first patron on Patreon eligible to be credited. Thank you.